So this is the second part that goes with the lesson 7.2. So having used the PowerPoint and started playing around with those algebra tiles, what we notice is it's kind of inefficient. So is there a better way of doing this? Well, of course there is. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the grids that we used in the previous unit. So for my x squared plus 6x plus 8, I went ahead and filled in my x squared because we know the big squares always go in the top. That's what we were using in that last part. And the plus 8, I'm just going to write down here as plus 8. Now, the rectangles, I don't quite know how many there is in each. Like it could be 5 and 1, it could be 4 and 2, it could be 2 and 4 for all I know. So all I'm going to do right now is just going to write down this plus 6x. Now, what we also discovered in the last section was the rectangles aren't actually that important. Once you've filled in this and this, you can actually find out this missing factor. So we're going to use that same idea again. So x plus 2, I wrote down the side here. So what we're trying to find is, what do I times x by to give me x squared? Now, if you're finding it difficult to answer it that way around, remember that the reverse is literally just a division question. So what I'm really saying is, what is x squared divided by x? Now, with this unit, we've always been giving out paper as well. So if you find it easier, just write out what the actual question is. When you're dividing, you're subtracting exponents. So 2 take away 1 is 1. So this would just be x, or x to the power of 1. I'm hoping by this stage we would know that x times x is x squared. And also, as we were filling in these factors, we should have noticed that there were rectangles here and then just numbers here. So the rectangles represent the x's. So that's a little clue while we're doing this as well. And while we're filling in these 8s, what I was hoping we would notice is that as we got our 2's here, we had like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We had 4 columns. And the reason we have 4 columns is 2 times by 4 gives us 8. Or even better, 8 divided by 2 gives us 4. So actually, rather than using the algebra tiles, because we don't get provided those on the SOL or tests anyway, it's actually easier for us to just draw the grid, but fill in the information that we know, and then from there, work out what those missing numbers are. Now, certainly if I'd given you this question with algebra tiles, it would have been very difficult because it says 30, and you'd have had to lay out 30 tiles for this. And as they're 6's, you would have put out 6, 12, 18, 24, 30. It would have taken a long time. Importantly, notice, though, that there's 5 columns of 6. So this would have been plus 5. Notice also 30 divided by 6 gives me that 5. So really, that's what we're doing. We're taking the number that's inside divided by the number on the outside, which is actually what we have here. We're going to do 30 divided by 6, and that will actually tell us what that missing number is. Now, same for here. X times something is x squared. And once again, that's just actually x. Notice that's actually what this part of the question is here. So as we're trying to find out what these missing 2 things is, we're working out the grid, but notice really what it is. It's this. It's the first terms and the last terms. So what about this 11x? Why aren't we using that? Well, remember, that's the rectangles. We don't actually need the rectangles to figure out what the missing factors are. Now, just to show you why this is 11x, you can, of course, fill out the rest of this grid. X times 5, 5x. 6 times x, 6x. And you can indeed see that that does give you 11x. It's just that that doesn't help us necessarily to figure out what these 2 factors were, or we don't need it to figure out what those ones are. As long as we know this, this, and these 2 things, they're the 4 things that we need to actually find out those missing factors. So first term divided by first term, last term divided by last term will tell us what that is. Rather than just showing you that rule straight away, I think it's important that you see the structure of this and why this works. That's why we start with the algebra tiles first. That's why we then bring it back in terms of this grid, so you can see where these things are coming from. But then also just to point out, rather than saying this times what gives you this, realizing that it's actually a divide question. It's just another way of asking the question, but also you can physically see that as you're looking at this question. So as we do more complicated questions, this one doesn't have any x's at all for this one, which is why I've kind of filled in the x's here. Notice that we can say 3x times what gives us 9x squared. Or even easier, we can just say, what is 9x squared divided by 3x? 3x. And we could say negative 4 times by what gives us negative 16. But we could easily just say, what is negative 16 divided by negative 4? which is positive 4 as well. And this is also much easier to do than when we were looking at the algebra tiles, trying to figure out on those more difficult questions, whether it was a negative tile or whether it was a positive tile. All right, last one. So this time, the grid we're kind of not even really using anymore, unless we want to check our answer, of course. So first terms, 6x squared divided by 2x is 3x. Negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. And now we have a better feel for why we're actually doing that. I didn't fill it in this time, but we know that the question's really this. Fill in our factor, we use the information in the square, and then we work out the other one. Just so we can check our answer, if we want to make sure that this is correct, let's fill in the rest of the grid. 2x times negative 2 is negative 4x. 3 times 3x is 9x. And if we look on these two terms here, hopefully on that diagonal, you can see that 9x take away 4x is indeed 5x. So we know this is the correct grid, and therefore we know this is the correct factor as well. But a really useful tool, if we know one factor, trying to find the second factor, we can use division. And when we have quadratics like this, then we can just do this term divided by this term, and that will tell us what the answer is without worrying about the x, because that's not part of that question. The assignment that goes with 7.2 is the next 10 questions, which will be slides 28 onwards, where it says your turn. So go ahead and try those. Don't use the algebra tiles. We know that's takes far too long. But go ahead and use this method now. Now we understand why this actually works. And that does it for the second part of this video.